I want to slow this down right at the start because the headline screams chaos, spectacle, emergency. And if you've been online at all, you've probably already seen clips, posts, thumbnails, and breathless commentary insisting that something extraordinary just happened. Former president surrounded, gates locked, prisoner in his own home. And here's the thing I want you to hold on to as we walk through this together. The most important part of this story is not whether a dramatic image is circulating. It's why so many people are ready to believe it, why it spreads so fast, and what that tells us about power, media, and the incentives baked into our political economy. That's the hidden story here, and it matters to your life more than the rumor itself. What's being claimed in simple terms is that Donald Trump was stopped from leaving the country, escorted back to Mar-a-Lago, placed under some form of house arrest, had his communications restricted, and is now effectively detained while awaiting trial. Those are serious allegations. They imply a massive escalation of state power, extraordinary legal steps, and a constitutional crisis. And because they are serious, they demand a serious standard of evidence. As of now, there is no public confirmation from courts, federal agencies, or credible reporting that such an event has occurred. That distinction between allegation and verification is not a technicality, it is the entire story. Now you might be thinking, fine, but why does this keep happening? Why do these narratives feel plausible, even inevitable, to so many people across the political spectrum? The answer sits at the intersection of distrust, media incentives, and a political system that has trained people to expect spectacle instead of process. Over decades, Americans have watched elites walk free after financial collapse, wars launched without consequence, corporate crimes settled quietly with fines. Accountability feels rare. So when a powerful figure finally appears vulnerable, even hypothetically, people are primed to believe the most extreme version of events. At the same time, the attention economy rewards urgency, fear, and exclusivity. A calm headline that says no verified change in legal status does not travel. A dramatic one that suggests lockdowns, guards, and secret restrictions travels instantly. That isn't about truth. It's about clicks, subscriptions, ad revenue, and algorithmic amplification. This is capitalism applied to information, and it does not optimize for accuracy. It optimizes for engagement. I also want to be clear about something else. Critically examining these claims does not mean defending Trump, excusing his conduct, or minimizing the legal cases against him. Multiple investigations and prosecutions are real, ongoing, and historically significant. But process matters, the rule of law matters, and pretending something has already happened when it hasn't actually undermines the very accountability people say they want. Think about how this lands on you. If you're a worker already cynical about institutions, this kind of rumor reinforces the sense that everything is either corrupt or theatrical. If you're struggling to trust media at all, it pushes you further toward camps that promise secret knowledge and insider access. And if you're just trying to understand what's real so you can make sense of the world your kids are inheriting, it makes that job harder. So before we go any further, I want us grounded in reality. No ankle monitor has been confirmed. No house arrest order has been announced. No verified report says Trump was stopped at an airport under federal authority. What we do have is a familiar cycle. A provocative claim, anonymous sources, dramatic framing, and an audience trained by years of institutional failure to expect the worst and believe the most extreme version first. From here, the real work is understanding why that cycle exists, who benefits from it, and what it reveals about power in a system where truth itself has become a commodity. To understand how we got here, you have to zoom out past this one rumor and look at the long buildup that made a story like this feel believable to millions of people almost instantly. For years, politics in this country has been turned into a reality show format layered on top of a legal system that moves slowly, deliberately, and often invisibly. Those two tempos collide constantly. One is built for spectacle and instant payoff. The other is built for procedure, filings, hearings, motions, and appeals that take months or years. When people are trained to expect the first and then encounter the second, frustration fills the gap and speculation rushes in to occupy it. Donald Trump sits at the center of that collision because he has always treated power as performance. Press conferences, rallies, social media posts, cliffhanger language about enemies and betrayals. That style didn't just shape his base, it reshaped how everyone talks about him, including critics and commentators. Everything becomes framed as a dramatic turning point, the walls closing in, the final act. And when the actual legal process fails to deliver that kind of narrative satisfaction on demand, people start inventing it. There's also a deeper institutional context you can't ignore. Trust in government, courts, media, and law enforcement has been eroding for decades, especially among working people who feel those institutions show up fast when it's time to punish them, but move at a glacial pace when it's time to hold the powerful accountable. If you've ever dealt with debt collection, eviction court, or workplace discipline, you know how immediate and unforgiving the system can be at the bottom. That lived experience makes it emotionally intuitive to believe that sudden, harsh action could also be taken at the top, even when history suggests the opposite. But here's where reality intrudes. When the state actually restricts someone's movement or communication, especially someone as prominent as a former president, it leaves a paper trail a mile wide. Judges sign orders, lawyers file motions, agencies issue statements, journalists corroborate across multiple independent sources. None of that is invisible and none of it is optional. Power at that level is bureaucratic, not cinematic. It looks boring precisely because it is constrained by process. What's happening instead is a kind of narrative arbitrage. Content creators take advantage of the gap between what people feel should be happening and what is verifiably happening. They offer certainty, urgency, and insider framing in exchange for attention and loyalty. Subscribe so you don't miss what we find. That line isn't about information. It's about monetizing anticipation. And the more polarized and anxious the audience becomes, the more valuable that anticipation is. You should also notice how these stories blur categories on purpose. Secret Service presence gets framed as federal detention. Security measures become imprisonment. Legal restrictions that don't exist get implied through tone rather than evidence. It's all suggestion, implication, and mood. That ambiguity is a feature, not a bug, because it allows the story to spread without ever being fully falsifiable. When challenged, it can always retreat to rumors, sources, or developing situations. The cost of this isn't abstract. It trains people to disengage from reality-based analysis. It teaches audiences that institutions only matter when they confirm an emotionally satisfying narrative, and it erodes the ability to recognize genuine authoritarian actions if they actually do occur. When everything is framed as an emergency, nothing is. So the question you should be asking isn't, is this true or false in isolation? It's why this kind of claim feels more plausible than the mundane truth that powerful people are usually handled cautiously, slowly, and with layers of legal insulation. And once you see that, you start to see how the spectacle itself becomes a substitute for accountability, a performance that absorbs anger without changing the underlying structure that protects power in the first place. Now, let's talk about the mechanics, because this is where clarity really cuts through the noise. House arrest is not a vibe. It is a legal status imposed by a court with explicit conditions, documentation, enforcement mechanisms, and oversight. It usually comes after formal charges, bail hearings, and negotiated terms between prosecutors and defense attorneys. It is not something that quietly materializes because someone tried to get on a plane. And it is especially not something that happens to a former president without immediate, widespread confirmation from multiple institutions whose job it is to make those actions legible to the public. The same applies to communication restrictions. Limiting someone's internet access, monitoring calls, or discussing ankle monitors are not casual measures. They are extraordinary constraints that require justification, judicial approval, and clear legal rationale. They are designed to prevent flight risk, witness tampering, or ongoing harm, and even then, they are contested aggressively in court. Defense attorneys don't shrug and accept them. They litigate them loudly. The absence of that legal noise tells you more than any anonymous insider claim ever could. What actually exists right now is something much more familiar, a high-profile defendant facing multiple legal challenges, moving through a system that is cautious to a fault when dealing with elite power. Judges weigh precedent, prosecutors avoid missteps that could derail cases, agencies coordinate quietly because the consequences of error are enormous. That slowness isn't evidence of conspiracy. It's evidence of how insulated power is when it sits at the top of the hierarchy. And this is where the class dimension comes into focus. For most people, the legal system is fast, punitive, and terrifying. Miss a payment, ignore a summons, violate probation, and consequences arrive swiftly. For the powerful, the system is deliberate, layered, and full of off-ramps. Motions delay, appeals pause, negotiations stretch. That disparity is real, and it's infuriating. But mistaking that frustration for proof of secret crackdowns doesn't challenge the system. It distracts from it. There's also a media ecosystem problem here that you should recognize because it affects how you understand everything else too. Platforms reward certainty, not accuracy. They reward emotional spikes, not careful distinction between confirmed facts and speculation. A creator who says this is unverified and here's why might be more responsible, but they will almost always be outperformed by someone who says this is happening right now and you're not being told the truth. That incentive structure doesn't just distort this story, it distorts labor issues, economic data, crime reporting, and public health. It pushes everything toward extremes because moderation doesn't convert well. Over time, that trains audiences to confuse intensity with insight and volume with evidence. If it feels urgent, it must be true. If it's calm, it must be hiding something. I want you to think about what that does to democratic accountability when people are constantly fed narratives of secret arrests, hidden crackdowns, and shadow enforcement that never materialize. Trust erodes further. People stop believing official confirmations when they finally do come. They disengage, or worse, they radicalize around imagined versions of state power while ignoring the real documented ways it operates every day against less powerful people. The irony is that this kind of storytelling ends up protecting the very structures it claims to expose. By focusing attention on fictional or exaggerated moments of elite punishment, it pulls focus away from the mundane, systemic injustices that actually persist. Wage theft, housing precarity, medical debt, regulatory capture. Those don't trend as easily as a locked gate and a rumor of an ankle monitor, but they shape your life far more directly. And that's the uncomfortable truth sitting underneath this entire episode. The spectacle feels like accountability, but it isn't. Real accountability is slow, procedural, and deeply unsatisfying to watch. It doesn't look like a movie scene. It looks like filings, hearings, and years of legal argument. Until we learn to sit with that reality, we'll keep mistaking performance for progress and rumors for justice. At this point, it's worth asking who actually benefits from this kind of confusion because it isn't random. On one level, creators benefit directly. Attention converts into revenue, status, and influence. But on a deeper level, the political system itself benefits when public energy gets channeled into spectacle instead of structure. If you're arguing all day about whether a former president is secretly under guard at a golf resort, you're not arguing about why the legal system treats white-collar crime differently than street-level crime, or why prosecutorial discretion so often tracks class and power. Look at how responsibility gets blurred. When rumors take center stage, accountability evaporates. There's no judge to question, no policy to examine, no statute to debate. Everything becomes vibes and villains. That's emotionally satisfying, but it's politically sterile. Nothing changes because nothing concrete is being challenged. It's a shadow boxing match where the audience exhausts itself swinging at silhouettes. And there's another layer here that I think a lot of people miss. These narratives also serve as a kind of emotional release valve. People are angry and they have good reasons to be. Wages haven't kept up with productivity. Housing costs are crushing. Healthcare is a constant source of anxiety. Trust in institutions is low because those institutions have repeatedly failed to deliver material security. A story that suggests the powerful are finally being boxed in offers catharsis without requiring systemic reform. It feels like justice, even if it's imaginary. For Trump himself, this environment is paradoxically useful. When everything is framed as persecution or extraordinary state action, it feeds a narrative of victimhood and exceptionalism. It turns routine legal proceedings into proof of martyrdom. Even false stories can reinforce that dynamic by keeping the focus on drama rather than substance. The quieter the real process is, the louder the imagined one becomes. You should also notice how little space there is in these stories for ordinary people, the workers at Mar-a-Lago, the federal employees who would actually have to carry out any such orders, the court staff, clerks, and public defenders who grind through cases every day without cameras or drones. Real state power is exercised through people doing paperwork, following procedures, and clocking hours. Erasing them makes power seem mystical and omnipotent, when in reality it is procedural and uneven. That misunderstanding has consequences. When people think power operates primarily through secret cinematic moves, they underestimate how much leverage exists in boring places like labor law, administrative rulemaking, budget oversight, and local courts. They miss where change actually happens, and they miss how often the system quietly reproduces inequality without any spectacle at all. I'm not asking you to dismiss your instincts or your skepticism. Skepticism is healthy. What I'm asking is that you aim it in the right direction. Question claims that lack evidence. Ask who is making them, how they benefit, and what assumptions they rely on. Compare the drama of the story to the documented behavior of institutions over time. 9 times out of 10, the truth is less exciting and more revealing. Because here's the thing, if one day a former president were genuinely placed under house arrest with movement restricted and communications monitored, it would not leak through anonymous tips and drone speculation. It would arrive through court orders, filings, and confirmations you couldn't avoid even if you tried. And when that happens, if it ever does, the public needs the capacity to recognize it as real, not just another episode in an endless stream of manufactured urgency. Until then, the real story remains unchanged. A legal system that moves slowly for the powerful, a media economy that rewards exaggeration, and a public understandably hungry for accountability, but repeatedly fed performance instead. The challenge is learning to tell the difference, because that skill matters far beyond this one rumor. Let's bring this back to the human level, because behind all of this abstraction, there are real people whose lives are shaped by how we understand power and justice. When misinformation spreads at scale, it doesn't just confuse, it hardens attitudes, it deepens mistrust, it makes people more cynical about the possibility of fairness at all. And cynicism, while emotionally protective, is politically paralyzing. If you believe everything is rigged and every outcome is fake, there's no reason to organize, to vote, to show up, or to demand change. Think about how differently this system feels depending on where you sit in it. If you're a low-income defendant, pretrial restrictions are not rumors. They are court dates you can't miss, ankle monitors you can't afford, travel limits that threaten your job, and supervision that follows you into every aspect of your life. Those realities rarely trend. They don't come with drone footage or breaking alerts, but they are happening every day quietly to people with far less power and visibility. That contrast is the real indictment, not that a powerful figure might one day face consequences, but that millions of others already do under conditions far harsher and with far fewer protections. When we fixate on imaginary versions of elite punishment, we inadvertently erase the very real, very unequal punishment that defines the system as it actually exists. This is why precision matters. Saying something might happen is different from saying it has happened. Speculating is different from reporting. And responsible analysis means being honest about what we know, what we don't, and what the system's past behavior suggests is most likely. That doesn't make you naive. It makes you harder to manipulate. There's also a responsibility on viewers, and I include myself in this, to resist the emotional payoff of being first or being in the know. The feeling of having access to hidden truth is intoxicating. It creates identity and community, but it also makes us vulnerable to narratives that prioritize loyalty over accuracy. Once you're invested in the story, correcting it feels like betrayal, not learning. If you care about democracy, accountability, and economic justice, that's a dangerous place to be. Those values depend on shared reality. They depend on evidence, process, and the willingness to revise beliefs when facts change. Without that, power doesn't get checked. It just gets rebranded as spectacle. And here's where I want to leave you thinking. What would real accountability actually look like in this system? Not the cinematic version, but the structural one. It would look like equal application of law. It would look like consequences that don't depend on wealth, status, or political identity. It would look like transparency that doesn't require insiders or whispers to decode. And it would look boring most of the time, because justice is a process, not a performance. The frustration you feel watching powerful people move slowly through the system is justified. The anger is understandable, but letting that frustration get hijacked by unverified claims doesn't serve you. It serves an economy of outrage that thrives on keeping you reactive instead of informed. In the final stretch, I want to talk about what this episode reveals about the deeper structure of capitalism, media, and political power, and how learning to read these moments more clearly gives you leverage, not just insight, because understanding how narratives are manufactured is the first step toward refusing to be managed by them. When you step back far enough, what this whole episode really exposes is how information itself has become a commodity shaped by the same forces that shape everything else under capitalism. Scarcity is manufactured, urgency is monetized, and attention is extracted the way profit is extracted from labor. The goal is not to inform you so you can act collectively or think structurally. The goal is to keep you watching, refreshing, reacting. That's not a moral failure of individual creators alone. It's a system that rewards distortion and punishes restraint. In that system, truth has a timing problem. It arrives slowly, layered in caveats and procedure, while false certainty arrives instantly and cleanly packaged. And because most people are exhausted, overworked, and economically insecure, the fast version often wins. You don't have time to read filings after a 10-hour workday. You have time to feel something. The system knows that. It exploits it. This is where class and power come back into focus. Elites are protected not just by lawyers and institutions, but by noise. When the information environment is flooded with speculation, outrage, and spectacle, real accountability gets buried. You can't track what matters because everything feels equally urgent. That confusion isn't accidental, it's functional. So when you see stories like this one about locked gates and secret guards and whispered restrictions, take a breath. Notice how it makes you feel. Then notice what's missing. The documents, the confirmations, the boring details. Absence is information too. And learning to read that absence is a skill worth developing. I don't want you to leave here trusting institutions blindly. They have not earned that. I want you to understand them well enough that they can't hide behind spectacle or confusion. Power is most vulnerable when it's understood, not when it's mythologized. If this way of breaking things down helps you think more clearly about what you're seeing and how it connects to your own life, stay engaged. Share your perspective in the comments. Push back where you disagree. And if you want to keep unpacking how economics, class, and power shape the stories we're told every day, make sure you're subscribed so we can keep doing this work together.